Good afternoon and welcome to today's program titled Patterns of Attachment, a New Language for Codependency. I'm Gary Enos, editor of Addiction Professional magazine. Today's program has been sponsored by Caron Treatment Centers and Breakthrough at Caron. Thank you to our sponsors and to you and our audience for giving us your time and attention. Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping details. Each window on your screen can be moved by clicking and dragging, or enlarged and minimized by clicking the icons in the top right corner of each window. Please use the Q&A area below the slides to submit a question at any time during the presentation. If you cannot see this area, simply click the red Q&A button. To download a copy of today's slides, please click the link in the resources area in the bottom left of your screen. If you have any technical issues during the program, please click the yellow Help button to troubleshoot the issue. For those seeking CE credit, certificates will be distributed via the green CE certificate button at the end of today's program, so please wait for further instructions at the conclusion of today's event. You also can tweet during today's presentation via the Twitter widget by clicking on the blue Twitter icon at the bottom of your screen. Simply click the Post and Authorize buttons to log into your Twitter account and begin sharing at the hashtag #APCodependency. At this time, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Ann W. Smith. Ann Smith is the Executive Director of Breakthrough at Caron, a 5.5-day residential personal growth workshop designed for those who are struggling with relationship patterns developed from early attachment injuries in core relationships. The program helps adults shift destructive life patterns, improve relationships, and strengthen self-esteem. In 2011, the innovative Breakthrough program was featured on Dateline NBC. Ann has a master's degree in rehabilitation counseling and is licensed as both a professional counselor and a marriage and family therapist in Pennsylvania. For nearly 30 years, her focus has been on family systems, healthy relationships, and experiential group therapy. She is a clinical member of the LMFT and has trained in emotionally focused therapy. She has lectured at numerous conferences and has conducted workshops on topics ranging from addiction in the family to healing relationships. Ann is the author of 2 books titled Grandchildren of Alcoholics, Another Generation of Codependency, and Overcoming Perfectionism, The Key to a Balanced Recovery. Her Psychology Today blog, Healthy Connections, is frequently listed as an essential read. Thank you, Ann, for taking the time to speak with us today, and with that, the audience is yours.
So, here we go. My very first webinar. Thank you so much for signing in with us today. And I'm very interested in the topic that we're talking about. It is something that became a focus for me this year because so many people are asking questions about clients and professionals both about the term codependency. Although a lot of people are still using the term, they believe, as I do, that it's rather vague and inconsistent and just plain confusing at times. They're at a loss to pin down a definition that works for all purposes, and so am I, and also report that some clients even find it offensive and a poor fit. I hope to clarify that issue today a bit by providing the beginnings of a new language to talk about the issues so many of our clients face. I welcome your questions and input on the issue, not just today, but after that if you're so inclined. So I'm going to move my slides along here. Our objectives today are first to demonstrate a basic understanding of the evolution of the term codependency because it does have a long history. Secondly, to experience a shift in the language from shaming labels to a description of a normal human response to chronic relationship stress. And third, to define and recognize attachment injuries and the patterns that develop because of those injuries. So the evolution of codependency began probably even before 1979 when I have read that was the first time it was in print. But the addiction field was beginning to show interest between 1980 and 1983 in treatment for the family in addiction treatment, and the focus was really primarily on residential treatment, inpatient treatment, and wanting to include the family. In 1981, Caron was one of the first programs to create a program, a cutting-edge program, that was about 4.5 days of education, films, group discussion, that kind of thing. It didn't include the addict at that time, but as it grew, the program focused on helping the addict by intervening with enablers through education and support. The early labels of the time, some of them did not stick, but the first that I had heard was co-alcoholic, and it makes sense at the time that it was someone who was affected by the addiction and was actually going downhill with the alcoholic. And it didn't stick, and partly that was because of the term chemical dependency replacing alcoholism. So the next one that came up in my memory was chief enabler or collateral, which is a term that I really didn't like. None of these terms really fit for what people were going through. Primarily the focus, too, was on the spouse. And there was an assumption that a spouse of an alcoholic or an addict was definitely a codependent. So one of the issues we have to include in that history really is a financial issue. Addiction treatment providers wanted to offer family treatment, but insurance would not pay for it. And they would have to have a program that was licensed and a diagnosis for the family members, which wasn't easy to come up with. Unsuccessful attempts were made to put it in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And the premise was that they believed that many professionals believed it was the opposite of narcissism, the polar opposite. Okay, I'm still getting used to this. So one of the things that Caron did, and I was not at Caron at this time, they provided a conference, and so did a lot of other people, but Caron took a lead in it, providing a national conference on alcoholism in the family that started in 1981. Over the years, they actually did 8 of these conferences where they invited leaders in the field of alcoholism, and particularly family. The focus was on the family issues and how children of alcoholics, Claudia Black would have been one of the speakers, Sharon Wakshatter-Cruz, and I came in as a speaker around 1984 after that when I took over the family program at Caron. And the term adult children of alcoholics and codependency began to emerge all over the country. There was a real collective thinking about that. Another thing that occurred was the development of 12-step groups, because there weren't very many programs or even counselors that were able to deal directly with these issues. And so Codependence Anonymous was developed a little bit prior to that, I believe, but during that time really became much more popular, and adult children of alcoholics. And the interesting difference between ACOA meetings and Codependence Anonymous really had to do with whether a person grew up in an alcoholic family. There were some people who went to CODA who really had never lived with alcoholism at all, but related to the subject, and that is very much the case today. Al-Anon was still strong. However, mostly it was for spouses of alcoholics then. So a definition was definitely needed. People talked about codependency for a long time before they actually tried to figure out what it was. It was vague through the whole process, actually. So in 1989, I was part of an effort of about, I think it was 12 to 15 people who formed a committee at the National Conference on Codependency in Scottsdale, Arizona. And we tried to define codependency. And this is the definition in this slide that we came up with. Codependency is a pattern of painful dependence on compulsive behavior and on approval seeking in an attempt to gain safety, identity, and self-worth. Recovery is possible. When I look at this, I'm of two minds. One is that I think it was wonderful that we were really trying to help people who were negatively affected by being in an addicted family. But at the same time, it is so general that it really doesn't spell out anything that we can nail down and apply to specific people. It was more that it really applied to everyone. Then I had a definition that I continued to use despite the fact that I was on that committee. My definition was had several parts to it around 1986. Codependency is a condition or a state of being that results from adapting to dysfunction, possibly addiction. Even then I was thinking it's not all about addiction, and in a significant other. And that it's a learned response to stress, which over a person's lifetime can lead to the development of the following characteristics. External focus, which is basically external locus of control. My well-being depends on someone else's behavior. Repressed feelings. It just isn't safe to have your feelings, and in many families, people really didn't even know how they felt. Comfort with crisis. When people are in chronic stress that isn't taken care of, it's not proactively addressed, they become convinced that that's what life is like. Boundary conflicts, that would be parentified children, under-functioning parents. Isolation, people were ashamed and uncomfortable in letting anyone know. Of course, back then there was still a very strong stigma to deal with. Stress-related illness, that goes hand in hand with repressed feelings, and compulsive behavior. When we're in pain and we can't do anything about it, we find ways to medicate it. So I was very curious as I was preparing for this about what is out there in the mainstream about codependency. Well, what I found were two definitions that are really very much based on the original definitions, but again, not consistent and not real clear. Merriam-Webster says codependency is defined as a psychological condition or a relationship in which a person is controlled or manipulated by another who is affected with a pathological condition, and in broader terms, it refers to the dependence on the needs of or control of another. It also involves placing a lower priority on one's needs while being excessively preoccupied with the needs of others. Pretty confusing in my mind. If I were a client looking for what's wrong with me, that might not be the clearest way to do it. The other definition is Britannica, concise. Codependency is an extreme dependency by one person on another who is suffering from addiction. Common characteristics include low self-esteem coupled with high need for approval. Not a formal diagnosis, codependency is a psychological syndrome noted in relatives or partners of alcoholics and substance abusers. The hard part about those definitions, all of them to date really, is that it applies to so many people that it really doesn't come up with an approach that people can take because it doesn't make sense. And many people have different understandings of what the term is. One of the things that was pretty consistent, though, were the perceptions of codependency. Even up until now, early perceptions were that codependency was some sort of an illness that was caused by a parent's dysfunctional or abusive behavior. Secondly, codependency is an abnormal, dysfunctional response with a negative connotation, which was sad. I mean, that not only did you find out that there was something wrong with you, but that it was probably partly your fault and you were really messed up. Thirdly, with its beginnings in the addiction field, it was implied that another person was the source, and in a sense it made codependents into victims. Some of the descriptive terms that I even hear today when I ask audiences what they think about codependency, and the terms they come up with are caretaker, people pleaser, controller, obsessed with others, meddlers, dependent personality. I don't want to be that when you think about it. Codependent was seen as an individual who helps too much, especially those they love. And that was considered a negative thing was also very sad. Healthy was defined as, and this is a sign of the times as well. This is definitely was the prevailing thought about just about everything at that time, particularly the late 70s and early to mid 80s. An individual who was self-reliant, assertive, independent, differentiated, self-responsible, and emotionally detached. Those were healthy people. So we're going to do a poll right now, and there will be questions on your screen. And we would ask you to take about 5 to 10 seconds, if you don't mind, and then we'll discuss a little bit about the results. There they are. So just take a couple of seconds to answer the question. Just pick whatever you think is most accurate. Okay, I think we can get the results. Okay. So it looks like we have about 61% saying all of the above, and the next largest would have been enablers were to blame for the progression of the addiction. Yeah, that's been my experience too. Of course, there's no right answer to this because it's all perception, but yeah, that's pretty much how it was. Enabling was a nasty word, and it meant if you had behaved better as a family member, your loved one would not have been as sick as they were. And I come from a family where my grandfathers were alcoholic, and I hear stories, have heard stories about how my one grandmother in particular struggled so much to deal with people blaming her for the fact that her husband drank the way that he did, and very sad, that she carried that responsibility, that if she was a better wife, if she had had a nicer home, that maybe he would have stayed home and he wouldn't have done that. And that's the extreme examples. But that continued, and parents feeling like they should have known and should have stopped it, which is not something that happens even now. With all the information that's out there, many people have an addict in the family that they don't know is an addict. So perceptions of addiction, on the next slide, in the 70s and 80s, in relation to the family, were really the prevailing thought was that the addict was viewed as healthy once he or she became sober. Now that's partly because treatment was new at the time. We had just developed outpatient treatment programs, and residential programs were growing. Secondly, a codependent was labeled as sick, controlling, and needed to get well in order to help the addict stay sober. Often addicts would come home from treatment saying that to their family members, wanting them to go to Al-Anon, of course, which was great, but the fact that they were again being blamed after having been in a horribly stressful situation for years and years, now they were told that they have to do something for it to get better. And finally, the third thing on there is the addict was not a codependent in the eyes of most people, that there was this thought that the addict just needed to go to treatment and go to meetings, and once they're sober, they're well, and that the family is going to have a lifelong challenge at changing and growing. So there were some counseling centers, public, private, where there was some counseling done for codependents, and during this period, there was a huge growth in the availability of that kind of counseling. The program we had at Caron actually had 60 people every single week going to the residential program, 5.5-day program. So I would say in outpatient counseling, the attitude was that we were supposed to be helping clients to change their enabling behaviors, And these were the good things: focus on self-care and self-awareness. And it goes along with the sort of Al-Anon approach, which I really loved, is mind your own business, take care of yourself, get stronger, and things will get better. Develop a personal support system, and that usually meant 12-step meetings. Examine the root causes of your own patterns. That was new, and that's something that we dealt with in the residential program. Identifying family roles. Sharon Weckscheider-Cruz, who'd been trained with Virginia Satir, wrote about and talked about specific family roles that were based somewhat on birth order: hero, scapegoat, lost child, and mascot. And it really made it possible to begin to talk to people about what their personal experience was and what were the specific issues for each. My thought is, at this point, looking back, that the family hero, who was usually the oldest child, caretaker, was considered codependent. The other roles didn't fit quite as well in that definition. So again, differentiation was sought after and believed to be the answer to the unmanageability in the lives of codependents. That's the way we all thought back then. So as a result, by 1990, everyone who had a problem in a relationship was labeled or self-diagnosed as codependent. Professionals minimized, not intentionally, but minimized the human need for attachment, and that was not helping relationships. Most of the work was focused on needs of the individual and neglected their relationships. The term selfish program was often used for people who were getting sober, going to meetings. They would say this is a selfish program, and which is very true in the very beginning of an addict's recovery, or anyone, even people with mental illness or any issue they're dealing with. They do have to focus on themselves, but professionals really need to be conscious of that person living in a system, and it's better for all concerned if they are included. So over the past 20 years, all the research has shown that when we work with an individual about problems in a relationship, it is likely to damage the relationship. When you think about talking to a spouse, for example, alone about their negative feelings toward their spouse, if that's the direction we take, the relationship is often damaged by that. So we had to change. We knew that our approach had to change. So we're going to do another survey question right now, another poll, and the questions will come up. There they are. And if you would take a few seconds to read the question and the answers. Okay. So we're going to move to the results now. Okay, so the family therapy field offered the addiction field a perspective which included 48% said the broader perspective, which supported relationships rather than only the individual. And I put some of these in because there were misconceptions at the time. The addiction field and the family therapy field were not holding hands early on. There was an assumption that the family therapy field blamed the family interaction for the addiction. In other words, that somehow the disruption in the family was causing or supporting the addiction. Definitely it was supporting, but we knew that it wasn't causing it. And that whole family treatment would have been the best way to go. Those were misconceptions. Also, the thing about abstinence, that if the family was healthy, that it wouldn't be necessary that an addict would be abstinent. So what we learned, those things were certainly a small portion of the people in the family therapy field thinking like that. But what we learned from them was that family involvement is the key, and that everyone really in a family was connected. So the contemporary view of codependency, I think, in my experience, I can only speak about living in the Northeast and doing this work for those 30 years that I've been at it, that it started for me when family intervention came to the forefront. My experience was with Vernon Johnson, as he described in his book, I'll Quit Tomorrow in 1973, and his book Intervention in 1986. I know that when I was trained in intervention, and the more time I spent with families and talking with them, especially prior to an intervention, the old way that we used to do it, that I saw the pain. I saw their pain. I heard their pain. I saw their struggles, and I began to think very differently about families and the need for treatment. So the family systems perspective really came to the forefront. Also in that was wonderful training that was available at Johnson Institute, not only for family intervention, but for doing group, experiential group with anyone who had grown up with, a lot for adult children of alcoholics, that had grown up with alcoholism or addiction. So what we learned from the addiction field or from the family systems field and really applied was that we do not live in a vacuum. Pain in one person in the system results in pain for everyone in that system. Each person experiences the stress differently, but all are affected. Addiction was not caused by the family, but thrives in a painful system. In order for the family to become healthy, all members of the family need some type of help. And this is not an individual process. A broader perspective was needed to support the relationships. The next step was the attachment theory perspective. Whoops, I went ahead a little bit. Let me just back up. Hopefully the rest of that slide will come up. There it is. Okay. So what we understood is it's all about love, that the reason people behave the way they do is because we need connection. And when the connection isn't going well for whatever reason, every human being adapts to some degree in an effort to sustain the emotional attachment. This experience does not. It's a human experience, and it does not need a label. It isn't dysfunctional for us to be worried about someone we love or to feel anxious when we're separated from them, even if it's by an addiction. Human beings are hardwired to attach for our own physical and emotional survival. As children, we will do whatever we must to keep that connection, whether it's good for us or not. In infancy and early childhood, our lives depend on that attachment. Secure attachment and comforting in childhood creates the ability to self-soothe later in life. Adult attachment is equally important. The lack of loving contact, as we all know, creates distress and the need for adaptive measures to compensate for the absence of the connection. Now, that's what we used to call codependency, as if there was something wrong with that. This is true for both adults and children. Now, most of us know about John Bowlby, and so I put it in here because I really like this one statement that is kind of obvious, but we need to remember it. John Bowlby viewed human beings as inherently relationship-seeking. Now, this was in 1959, naturally oriented to seek contact comfort, and naturally inclined to seek proximity to familiar, comforting figures in times of threat, pain, or need. We know that. We certainly don't need research to tell us that, but that's the approach that we need to take. Now, this slide I put in for personal reasons and because the moment that this occurred, I was convinced that this is one of the best pictures that I've seen capture a moment of attachment. It was a few years ago. I was out sitting on my deck with my granddaughter, Hannah, who was 3 at the time. Her mom and dad were also there with my husband and I, and sat across from her. These 2 photos were taken by my husband simultaneously and caught this precious moment when Hannah witnessed her parents' affection and hugging and laughter. The moment she saw it, her expression became what you see in that picture in response to witnessing her parents' love for each other. She lit up, her face lit up, she beamed with an expression of love and security and safe haven. These things are what attachment is made of. So how does this, if it is not the way that we thought it was with codependency, that your association with difficulties creates this condition, then what is it? Well, I have to go back a little bit and talk about attachment and how it works. And when we are born, we have one task when we're infants, and that is to find the person who will look into our eyes and transmit the message, I am here for you always. Without this person, we would surely die. Most of us have more than one person, mom, dad, grandma, aunt, uncle, big sister, but they aren't committed to us in the same way that our person is. Even an infant knows the difference and has a preference. Usually it's mom. Doesn't have to be, but usually it is. The connection made with that person is called attachment, and it begins the process of wiring our brains for relationships for the rest of our lives. I look at it this way. Plan A, before we're born, this is just my thought, Plan A is that the universe is waiting for me, that I am the center of the universe, and when I'm born, all of my needs will be met, that I won't have to do a thing to make that happen. Since we're hardwired to connect and we will die without it, infants in their helplessness count on that care for their survival. They don't have to do anything to get it. And generally, human beings will rise up in the physical care of infants. So first we expect perfection, and what we have found out that we didn't know 30 years ago, especially during those years of the codependency, we didn't know that birth to 5 was extremely important. You know, we were mostly looking at things that happened to individuals who grew up in painful families, like events, their specific relationship, and whether or not they were neglected or abused. What we know now is even the environment matters, and that during those first 5 years, and while our brain is wiring, we are building that our future for connection, for love and connection. In any family, with or without dysfunction, children are going to discover fairly quickly that mom and dad, because they're human, are not totally consistent or predictable. For instance, mom might have migraines. So once in a while she's not able to talk and sits in the dark. And maybe dad has a tough job or he's in the military and he's not around very much, and then mom cries while dad is gone. Or maybe they have a sibling who's difficult or disabled. Maybe there are financial problems. Anything can disrupt our attachment. So children have to come up with a way of coping with that, because we must have connection. Loss of that connection to very young children feels like a near-death experience. And so in stressful or painful families, which can be anything, just because a family has alcoholism does not mean that it is a very distressed or dysfunctional family. It really depends on the circumstances and how stressful it is. Some people may have a problem with alcohol that doesn't directly affect children for a long time in those early years. So Plan B, when it starts to get stressful and parents are very distracted over a longer period of time, is that the child has to find a way to increase the quantity and quality of their contact with their person. But how are they going to do that? They need to intensify their efforts to get safety, security, and comfort. As early as age 3, they begin to adapt and do whatever is necessary for attachment, connection, or attention, regardless of the circumstances. Obviously, when attachment is insecure, anxiety is increasing. And if you can just imagine any moment where a child feels a parent pulling away. One example that I often use is if picture a family with a mom in the house all at one time, mom in the house, 5-year-old little girl with a 2-year-old brother. Mom is in the kitchen, and mom is feeling very sad. We don't know why, but she puts her head down on the table in the kitchen, and she's crying. And the 5-year-old sees that. Imagine for a moment what that child might do, what their response might be. Now, I think our assumption would be most children would go to mom, maybe stroke her hair, maybe tell her it's going to be okay, maybe help in some way. And often people think that has to do with who the child is and that child is a helper. Well, that might be true, but what we've got to do is put it in the context of attachment. That child, without that mom, especially if the stress had been going on for a while, this child is very insecure and very anxious, and their life depends on, and their siblings' life depends on what happens in that moment, that they want to prop mom up. They want to get mom on her feet, have mom being strong and capable so that they can go back to being a child. That particular example is a really good example of a classic codependent caretaker beginning in life. And the little guy out in the other room, they have lots of options. So I'm going to get into that in a minute about what might happen with something like that. So I see 3 factors as very much influencing how a child adapts, how every one of us adapted. Even if there was no dysfunction, we do a little adapting. But when it's stressful or painful, we do a lot of adapting. Temperament, birth order and siblings' choices, and degree of stress or trauma. So we'll talk a little more about those. Keeping an eye on my time. How the temperament. Temperament is our inborn personality and traits that's permanent, and it makes up what I call essence. Gifts and strengths as well as challenges are part of it. Some traits work really well. Some are a source of discomfort and have to be set aside for a while. And that really depends on the child and how parents respond to those traits. If, for instance, a kid is cute and funny and it works, they may do it a lot. If they're helpful, they may use that more than is really good for a child to use. If they're very outgoing and talkative and parents aren't responsive to that, they may have to shut down and pull back. So people give up parts of themselves in order to manage to keep a connection in that family. And the next thing is that birth order and sibling choices. We often thought in the past that birth order had a huge impact, and it does have an important impact, but I really believe temperament is even more influential. But birth order is that if you were born, I'll give you an example that is just one example, and what I'm getting away from is the whole idea of labeling it. If you're first, this is what you'll do. We don't know what you will do. It depends on your personality. For instance, if you were born first, but you don't have what I call a leader gene, you're not one of those people who would always step up to the forefront and start taking charge. If you're not that kind of kid, you're not going to be that type of firstborn. But in every family, my experience has been in every family someone steps up. So the first one who has a leader gene is going to be the one doing it. So another example would be someone who does have the leader gene, born first, and is a born leader and helper, has a lot of compassion, and that when they are in a situation that has conflict or that's a little bit scary, what you'll see with this child is they're the one who would demonstrate a natural response to move toward painful situations to try to help. The child would be the classic codependent, the one that we often call codependent. but it's not necessarily going to happen if the child doesn't have those traits. If the child is born second, third, or fourth, there was that little guy out in the living room while mom was crying, it also depends on what their temperament was. But they are not going to be a leader unless they have that trait. So let's say it's someone who is not a leader and their big sister was. This child reacts to what the big sister has done by sort of backing up a little bit. If they're an extrovert, they tend to move away from the conflict toward other things like tasks and activities. They may tend to leave when their anxiety goes up. Some of them will continue to have their ear to the situation, and others will not want to know at all. And if they happen to be introvert and independent, they are probably going to pull away into themselves. They're going to withdraw when their anxiety goes up. This is often called avoidant attachment style. And what I didn't mention in the earlier slide was that the other profile that I just described with that firstborn would be anxious attachment style. So anxious goes toward the conflict and tries to fix and help. Avoidant attachment style pulls away. Okay. And the third factor that enters into developing these patterns really has to do with the degree of stress or trauma. If the stress is extreme, because of abuse, addiction, mental illness in a parent or something like that, and a child is insecurely attached, of course, he or she may struggle with any choice to connect and will really be ambivalent when they're afraid. When they're afraid, they may go toward their person or people in general, or they may pull away. They have a great deal of fear and are like moving targets in their relationships into adulthood. Commitment phobics will often relate to this type, where they're very confused and they're on a continuum between fear of entrapment and fear of abandonment. They are, when they're in a relationship, it starts out very intense, but once it is required that they be there, they get uncomfortable and run. And then after they've been running for a while and not close, they feel abandoned. And so no matter where they are not comfortable in its most extreme form. And that would be called the fearful avoidance style. There's a book by Mickelenser and Shaver called Attachment in Adulthood that came out in 2007. That is a really good source of research and understanding about adult attachment patterns. So these patterns, when we're insecure, emerge without conscious awareness, and that's what's astounding when we're working with these folks in treatment, that they're stuck in patterns that they don't have any awareness of. They go from problem to problem in relationships and don't realize that the common denominator in every problem is them, that wherever we go, there we are. So some traits are used to excess and others may be disowned, and they end up not knowing themselves at all. Coping mechanisms developed out of necessity in early childhood are used well into adulthood, so that what we see is that the problems they're running into have a lot of similarity one to the next, and they're not aware of it. And these brilliant survival patterns will sabotage the search for loving connection as adults. So we're going to do one more survey. So if you just take a minute and take a look at the questions there about attachment injuries. We'll give about 5 to 10 seconds. Okay, we'll go to the results. Okay, so actually the last two have the largest percentage due to abandonment or betrayal at key moments of vulnerability. and that attachment injuries require special attention and therapy in order to recover. Yeah, rejection itself, it's amazing how resilient we are as human beings. Just rejection isn't enough to really inflict an injury. We can recover, but attachment injuries are much more serious. According to Susan Johnson, in her Becoming an Emotionally Focused Couples Therapist workbook, which I've used a lot, she defines attachment injury as relationship traumas or wounds that leave the relationship unsafe and limit emotional engagement. And the important factor in that, taking a minute to come up here, is that at the moment of an attachment injury, a person feels abandoned or betrayed at key moments where comfort and connection are most important, and the pain can linger for years. Key moments might be during a period of illness, during a miscarriage or injury, a time of loss, a death of a parent, childbirth, affairs, especially if affairs occur at a critical time in their family, a time of vulnerability. In a child, an attachment injury might be something like a parent a parent showing up addicted or high or drunk at a really important event in a child's life, or just not showing up at all when they were very, very vulnerable, sick, upset, really needing comfort. And those are the things that continue. And, of course, the serious abuses of sexual abuse and physical abuse. So to sum it up, the fact is that the people that we see at Breakthrough and that a lot of people see in their offices are coming for help because of their shame and fear. And the pain that they carry with them does not need to be worsened by our use of language that puts them down or makes them feel responsible for the bad things that have happened in their lives. We have to be really, really aware of the words that we use and the impact of our words. By using sensitive and affirming attachment language, we can normalize the experiences and choices of clients who did the only thing possible to maintain their spirits and find connection. The language of attachment is relatable, understandable, eases pain, and fosters trust in the therapeutic process and within clients themselves. By changing our language, we're opening a door to healing. So it looks like we are at a point where we can have some of your questions. But before we get to that, I just want to thank you all for being part of today's event. It was my first, and it was not unpleasant. I enjoyed it, and I hope we do see some of you or hear from some of you in the future. So thank you for being part of it. I'd like to invite you also to join us, if you can, at the Breakthrough Relationship Conference later this month in Philadelphia. We're going to give you information at the end of the slides. You can find information also on our website. So I guess we're ready for questions. Oh, the next slide is the one that will tell you about the conference. So we're ready for questions.
Thank you very much, Ann, and we'll get back to that on the conference as soon as we wrap up on our Q&A. So thanks again for a very informative presentation. We have had some questions that have come in. There is still time, folks, to submit a question if you would like, and you can do that by using the Q&A widget below the slides on your screen to submit a question, or if you cannot see that area, you can click on the red Q&A button. And we had a question that came in that basically said, you say that it's possible to damage a relationship by talking to one member alone. Doesn't this go against the idea of circular causality, holding that if one family member changes his or her behavior, the others will also change as a consequence? Any thoughts on that?
That's a really good question. The truth is, only that is true. You can influence the system, the family system, or even just the relationship, but only if the therapist you're working with has a family systems perspective in their minds. When we're working with clients individually about their relationships, we have to be experienced and knowledgeable enough to be thinking about what is this relationship like on both sides, not just from the perspective of the person in the room. So it definitely can work to influence the relationship for the better. But if we just listen to complaints, negative complaints about the relationship, and just support the differentiation of our client, we can unwittingly pull them away from that relationship.
Very good. And a question, would it be possible, this came in from the audience as well, would it be possible to give some examples of reassuring attachment language that you were referencing?
Absolutely. Reassuring attachment language, I'm not sure if they're asking about in an adult relationship or a child one, so I'll mention both. As a parent with a child who is anxious or disturbed by something, if, for example, if a child saw mom with her head down on the table crying, what mom would do that would be reassuring would be to stop what she's doing, turn to the child, and be there for the child, regardless of how she was feeling. And that child would really need an explanation about what was going on, and that it wasn't the child's fault that she was crying. It's not something that the child had done that caused it, and that sometimes mommy feels bad and sometimes mommy needs to talk to people to feel better, something like that. And in an adult relationship, simple things, and actually in both, simple things are reassuring, like eye contact, touch, healthy non-sexual touch, being attentive, doing follow-up questions to someone you care about if they're struggling with something, explaining your own behavior, not doing things like walking out the door and not saying anything when you're upset. That's the type of reassurance that sustains a healthy relationship.
Excellent. And it seems very clear that a few of our participants today were very interested in your comments on birth order, and one asked, where can I find more information on birth order and its effect on individual characteristics and other such influences? Any thoughts on what resources might be available there?
Well, the way that I put it, I'm not sure that you would. There's nothing particular I can recommend, but I do know there's a lot written right now. There are a lot of books written, self-help books, parenting books that address that. In my second edition of Overcoming Perfectionism, which will be out in March, I go into it in a lot of detail. So that's one resource that will be out there. It's not in my original first edition, but it will be in the second edition. But I really think if you just go on Amazon and do a little search, you'll find some of that.
Okay, very good. I'm going to go through maybe one or two more questions before we kick it back to you. So let me see what I have here. We've had a lot of questions that have come in toward the end of our talk here. Hold on one second. This is a bit general, but how do you suggest a person right the wrongs of these dysfunctional actions after they have already happened?
Now, if we're talking to a parent here who's concerned about their children, it is never too late to make that change. Children are resilient, and assuming it's not a case of physical or sexual abuse where absolutely professional help is required, really learning about healthy parenting and beginning to apply it. But the most important thing for a parent to know, or any adult really, is you must apply it to yourself first. You can't just read a manual about how to be a better parent. You have to be a healthier person yourself. You need to know your essence. You need to know your pattern, because your anxiety is much more influential than any behavior you would change. So that's essential. It's true with adult relationships too. If you've made mistakes, and we often do get second chances with the relationship we're in or future relationships, stop and change yourself. Take a look at it. Get some counseling. Private therapists are out there. Self-help groups are out there. Breakthrough is out there. I'll talk about that for a minute before we close, but there is help.
And Ann, I'm going to wrap up with this question, and then we'll kick it back to you to talk a little bit more about the conference. But this person asks, my client has eliminated each of her relationships in her recovery from codependency and has, in effect, isolated herself. Any comments on this type of reaction in recovery?
Oh, that's a very common reaction. I especially in the past, I saw that a lot, where what she isn't getting a handle on is her own pattern. It's wherever you go, there you are. So she has no alternative other than have no relationships or just keep on repeating the same one. So getting that person to be abstinent from relationships is fine for a little while they really explore who they were in each of the relationships they were in, and probably importantly would be looking at childhood and how they coped with the anxiety of their own childhood, because that's where it began. And I love to see people recapture their essence and find the best parts of themselves and begin to sort of moderate some of the things that they've done too much and to bring out the things that they haven't done enough of.
Well, that's great, Ann. We're going to wrap up on the question part, but I wanted to kick it back to you for some closing remarks on Breakthrough at Caron and the conference. So why don't you proceed with that?
Okay. All right. I think the slide is, this is the Breakthrough slide. Just want to tell you what that is. It's a program that is a 5.5-day intensive group process. It's a personal growth workshop that's available for anyone who is not mentally ill, meaning out of control with whatever their issue might be with mental illness, and also not in an active addiction. We want people to have 6 months abstinence before they attempt this. And it's really recommended that they have some therapy going on either before or definitely after they come to the program. But it's a good way for people to tap into those deeper issues that are kind of hard to get at, and people get stuck in their pattern and really need some outside help to identify it. So Breakthrough is available every week of the year except for the week of Christmas, and it goes from Sunday to Friday. And if anyone is interested, they can just call the 800 number there on the website and give you some information. And then the next slide, I believe, should be about the conference. Yeah, we have that conference coming up in October, and the speakers are listed there. And we're going to be doing a lot of interesting topics. I'll be talking about blended families and about attachment in across generations and how we carry that out. We'll also have a speaker about military relationships for veterans and anyone who's been in the military, and also about being a young parent of young children. And I can't quite read the whole thing myself. I have a very small slide here, so I'll let you read it yourself. But just give us a call. The number is on there, or go to the website to see more about that. So thank you again.
And thank you very much. We have some final instructions for our participants today regarding CE credit. At this time, you can click on the green CE certificate button located at the bottom of your screen to generate your CE certificate for this event. Please note that you must have viewed today's entire program to qualify for a CE certificate. Should you have any other questions or issues regarding CE certificates, please click the Contact CE Help Desk button at the bottom of your screen to email our help desk. You can also reach this help desk by emailing info@vendomegrp.com. As a registrant of today's event, you will receive an email in the next 24 hours which will provide on-demand access to an archived recording of this presentation for up to 1 year from today's date to share with colleagues. Also, if you enjoyed today's program, we invite you to view a list of upcoming webinars and to join our community discussion through our Facebook and LinkedIn groups through the links featured in today's resource list. On December 4th, by the way, Caron will be sponsoring another webinar titled Relapse and Recovery, Being Sober is More Than Just Not Drinking and Drugging. That will be presented by Christopher O'Reilly, who is the clinical supervisor of the relapse unit at Caron, PA. I want to thank Ann Smith once again for an excellent presentation this afternoon. I also would like to thank our sponsor, Caron Treatment Centers, and Breakthrough at Caron for making today's program possible. Finally, thank you to you and our audience for participating. We hope you'll join us in the future for another Addiction Professional webinar. This concludes today's presentation.